Whoa, we just finished recording and this is super exciting. Today we talked about, well, actually, we had some viewer questions and then we talked about profit or pay yourself first and we got personal. Dane, what were some of your takeaways?
Oh man, this was actually a really good episode. One of my biggest takeaways is that I am an irresponsible spender, Hugh, and I need people to tell me no. How about for you? What was one of your biggest takeaways?
For me, I kind of got into the how to do it, the why to do it. We will get into how to apply it in the future, but it's just a base fundamental of the concept. And my biggest thing was that I am irresponsible. I know I'm irresponsible. So I'm going to design a system that protects me from me. And I did that a long time ago. And then, when I was 22, and then now I just tweak it along the way. I don't have to think ever again, which is great.
I loved that. And speaking of when you were 22, which means you were a young man, are you setting your children up for success? Are you teaching them to pay themselves first? That's a question we explore.
More to come. Stick around for the rest of the episode. Welcome back to the FU Money Podcast. We are joined today by the co-host Dane Logan. FU Dane.
FU Hugh, and great to see you again.
Great to see you. So what are we talking about today?
Today, actually, it's a really cool concept called pay yourself first. And it's something that we're going to dive into among other great things. But we had some viewer interactions and some questions that I thought we could start with, if you don't mind starting there.
Let's do it. All right. So we had folks reaching out and they were asking us questions. So we just thought we'd integrate it first. So let's hear the first one.
I thought this was pretty cool because, as Hugh had mentioned, we're going to try to take viewer questions or comments and we're going to introduce them into some of the beginnings of our podcast episodes. This one was from Luke from Oklahoma. Shout out to Oklahoma and Luke. You're freaking one of the coolest guys I've ever met in my life. He asked, in the very beginning, in a previous podcast, you talked about being in tons of debt and had an emergency plan. Well, what is y'all's emergency plan? So I thought that was a pretty great question.
Luke, that is a fantastic question. And the answer to that is we are actually going to be having an episode coming out soon all about emergency savings and emergency plans. So you're just going to have to stay tuned.
Yeah. It's such a good question. Yeah, like and subscribe. It's such a good question that we are dedicating an entire episode to emergency plan and emergency savings and emergency fund. You can, call it a million different things, but awesome question. Thank you for the engagement, and we will get to that sooner than later.
And just so everybody knows, again, in the early episodes, we talked about, hey, we're going to get into, everyone wants the steak and potatoes, right? But first we need to start with mushed up baby food. And so we're going to be doing all the basic concepts first, and then we're going to talk about the high level stuff. We don't want to overwhelm folks. I'm not saying we're experts. We're definitely not, but don't know where you're coming at us from, what your information level is at, what your education level is at. So we want to make sure that this is useful for everybody and grow everyone to those cool things that we got going on.
Well, absolutely.
All right, next.
I was just going to say one quick disclaimer. And how we're going to do that is we're really going to back it off a little bit and dedicate each episode to a type of money concept. Emergency plan, emergency fund, LLC, and why it's
401ks.
important. 401ks versus IRAs, all that fun stuff. So really easy for the consumer and the listener.
Awesome. Next viewer question. We've got Crystal out of Missouri. Hi, guys. I don't mean to be rude, but what do you mean when you say values? I think this is from our second episode, where to begin. And that's what they're referencing there. So if you haven't listened to that, it's a good one.
Great question,
So Dane,
Crystal.
what do you mean by values?
Well, it's usually when you take gold and you take those old scales and you measure it with something. No, I'm just kidding. So this was a really cool question because Hugh introduced this and it got me thinking early on. And all we mean is values is the way in which you want to live your life. If what you value most is your money and your time and your resources and focus being put there, or are you putting it on everything else outside of what you actually value? Can you give an example of values for yourself, for example, Hugh?
Yeah, I mean, there's great examples. So basically, you're going to look at yourself, you're going to look at your tracking, right? That was all about, hey, just start, before you even get into any of the fancy stuff, just look at what you're actively spending. And then see if it aligns with what you say you want for your life. So if you say, hey, I want to be a responsible person who, lives by the beach and has a great time, And I don't know, then you go and you see, oh, I eat fast food all the time, or I'm spending all this money here. Or you say you want to be a lazy bum and sit on the couch and just play video games, but you're spending all your money going to the gym and eating healthy food. So you're just checking,
Guilty.
are you, is what your existing money, where you're spending your money, does it align with what you say you want for life? A great example would be, this is a great date advice for you and your spouse or girlfriend or wife or whatever. And you can say, hey, top 10 things that you want to do with money and top 10 things for yourself. And you guys do it independently. Just write it down on a piece of paper. And one of the things could be like, oh, I want to live by the beach. Okay, maybe that's a goal, maybe that's a value, but then in your like top 10 things you want to do is doesn't include go to the beach. Those are misaligned, right? Where you want to spend money versus where you are spending money, right?
Right.
Oh, I want to provide for my be healthy and provide for my kids' education. Oh, okay. Well, cool. That's great. But here you see me buying a $50 video game, or, us going out to fast food all the time. Well, I said I wanted to put $100 away to my kids, but I say I don't have the money, but here in my spending, I see a misalignment of my values just because you were unaware of it, right? Nothing to be embarrassed about. All of us usually, before I was started paying attention, I was completely unaware of where my money was going.
Yeah. And so I love
So
that. Another great example, I hear so many people say, I want to live where there's land one day, slow down, and, even homestead. That's the big new, buzzword. And every one of these people who are saying that I know are living in a city or living in a suburb or living a very fast-paced life with no plans or execution or even alignment on getting them to where that would be, right? So again, what do you value? What do you want? Is it the healthy food, the slowed down lifestyle, any example that you could imagine? And then from your tracking, are you even putting any time, attention, focus, or money towards those things which you claim to value?
that was a fantastic question, Crystal. And again, if you guys have questions, feel free to submit them to fumoney at hughcarnahan.com or find us on our various socials and all that good stuff. So,
All the good
okay,
stuff.
getting into the
Sweet.
topic.
Drum roll. So we
Dane,
that was a terrible drum. We
what do
need
you
sound
think?
effects. what,
We should
what we're
make our
gonna
own
do?
sound effects.
We should. We should. Ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba. We are going to get into pay yourself first today. It is a really,
Sounds
really,
expensive.
it can be. Well, it
I'm
should
worth a
be.
lot, Dane. You
That's
can't
what I'm
afford
saying.
me.
You should be able to afford yourself. That's the point. But most people put themselves last. So, all kidding aside, pay yourself first is one of the hardest things for most people, even though it's one of the simplest concepts in all of finance. And it doesn't matter what book you read, it doesn't matter what guru you listen to. This is like always a founding principle or topic. And I would say more than 90% of people don't do it, even people who are successful, just FYI. So I read a book a very, very long time ago. It was the 5 Lessons a Millionaire Taught Me by Richard Paul Evans. And this was the number one thing that he did. And he funded everything in his life, became a multimillionaire and entrepreneur. Really amazing concept. But let's actually talk about what the heck it is. Hugh, what is pay yourself first?
Before we talk about what the heck it is, I'm going to build up the suspense just a tiny bit more. This is why we are retired. Why, okay, whatever. I'm financially independent. I'm working because I choose to. Dane's employed. I've got real estate. All that stuff is because of this principle right here. And you can do this, the listener. If you haven't done this already, you can do this in about 5 to 10 minutes immediately after this podcast. You'll have all the information you need. And I'll just say, just do it. Wherever your starting point is in life, you could start immediately, but most people don't. And then they're going to complain when they're 60 or 70 and they're like, oh my gosh, I have no money and my kids hate me, all that stuff. So just starting out, super easy. You should be able to do it almost immediately. So it is basically the best way to do it is to set up an auto draft right out of your direct deposit. That the first thing that happens is your paycheck goes to savings right off the top, and you are forced to live off of everything else. And you can go into your bank account app. I remember some companies I used to work for, I could go to the HR department and I could get my direct deposit to actually split my paycheck where 80% of it went one place and 20% went to a different place. And then the different place was a completely different bank. So I straight up didn't even see the money. And so I just lived off of that. So that is a concept called small plate theory. We're going to hear a little bit about that next. So Dane, tell us about small plate theory.
Small plate theory, and it's actually interesting you bring this up because I lived in a country which you would see this in reality. So, big plate, you're going to fill that plate up full of food. Americans are really, really good at this. Go to a barbecue buffet and you'll see mountains of food on someone's plate. Hence, you will eat a lot. Middle plate, less food can be put on that plate. So, less temptation, less ability to eat as much. And if you really want to accomplish, let's say, something like health and wellness, you would switch to a small plate. And that small plate, you can fill up X amount of food that's natural for the body. That small plate, and great examples of this would be France, Japan, societies that consume less, that eat less by changing their habits and their thinking. And so they would adopt small plates because a small plate only allows you to eat so much food. In its most like basic form, that's what small plate theory is.
That's pretty close. I'll add a little bit. So at
I
least in the
thought
United
you would.
States and a lot of Western countries, we are taught from a very young age to finish all the food on your plate. It is a universal thing that generally exists in the United States and Western countries. Finish all the food on your plate. And so researchers said the habit is established to finish the food that's on your plate. What if we just got smaller plates? Will people lose weight? And the answer to that was yes, they will. And so the theory behind small plate theory is actually don't change your habits, just swap to a smaller plate, keep the same habits. And so when it comes to finances and money, we as humans generally are pre-programmed. Most listeners coming into this, if you've never been exposed to financial education before, you might have one bank account. Your money goes to that bank account and then you spend money from that bank account. We determine what money we can spend by looking and seeing the number in that account, and then we go buy the thing. That's just the way humans are. So small plate theory or pay yourself first is saying break out a separate account, preferably in a separate bank or an area that you can't get to it or you don't see it often. And then your savings automatically goes there or investments. And then you still only look at the one bank account and then you make all your decisions based on that bank account. That is the pay yourself first. And it's so simple because the human doesn't have to think. I'm protecting me from myself. So
Yeah,
that's kind of
that's exactly
that
what I
is
said. And
so why do we
exactly
do
right.
this?
Well, you're really dealing with psychology too. You said humans are going to do something a certain way, so you have to set up a system that protects yourself from doing it the wrong way. And really pay yourself first. And what Hugh has been alluding to is you can make this habit automatic, and it's paying yourself off the top. And how was it explained to me in the book by Richard Paul Evans is when you're given a paycheck, when you receive pay, and or we're just going to use a paycheck right now for an example because there's also bonuses, commissions, those are extras. Okay, those are nice to haves. But your income, your take home pay, you should always be able to allot some percentage of that to you first. And that goes, to Hugh's point, automatically into an account that is your yourself first account. I even have that labeled with my bank, which was really cool. So when I get a paycheck from Hugh, thank you, Hugh, all of a sudden that will draft immediately into my account. And before I even have a chance to touch it, it is separated into, and I started at 10%. Some people need to start at 5% if you really have a lot of debt, let's say when you're listening to this podcast. And some people have low debt, so they might be able to put 15, 20%. It doesn't really matter what that is. But paying yourself first says, I have money for me. And we'll talk about what to do with that money later. But the habit is what you want to set, and you want to automate that. And funny story, I didn't realize until Hugh, one day we were doing a company meeting, a morning meeting, and we were talking about pay yourself first. And you're like, I want everyone to take out their phones right now, and I want to automate that. Do you remember that, Hugh?
Yep. Yeah,
And
we
I was
allocated
like,
company time for people if they wanted to. It wasn't a
yeah,
requirement to say,
yeah.
here's time right now to set up an auto draft to a savings account if you want to do that. Because we had just learned in our continuing education slide, hey, this is a concept. Who's done it? one or two people raise their hands. I said, let's just pause the meeting, everybody, for the next 5 minutes. You can automate. If you don't have to, but if you want to, use this company time to make yourself in a better financial position.
Yeah. And I remember thinking, I'm not going to be able to do this from my phone app. And I, sure enough, pulled it up, dropped down my accounts, and I was like, oh, reoccurring payments. Oh, pay X amount from this once, a paycheck's received. And I was able to do it in 5 minutes. That's how easy it was to automate. So I was even guilty of not automating, even though I had formed the habit years and years and years ago. It was always manual. I would log in and then I would transfer it over. And it made it difficult and annoying. So half the time I wouldn't do it. That's just, like you said, human psychology. If it was in the bank account, I'd be like, oh, I'll spend it. Oh, crap. I didn't put it aside first. And after that, I don't even think about it. And I looked in there and I was like, oh, where'd that $500 come from? And I was like, oh my gosh, it's because it's all automated. It was great.
And you didn't even miss it. You didn't even notice it was gone because you kept living life like you did. And I wanted to bring back a point that Dane had said just a few minutes ago. If you're just starting out, you can put large, like if you're brand new, you don't have any debt, you're 17, you're 18, you're 15, you live at home and you work for, I don't know, Cold Stone Creamery or whatever it is, right? You're Brandon Turner 2.0 and you're just, you're at home. You can start by putting 50% or more in. And people are like, I can't do that. That's impossible. Okay. To that, I'm going to say almost all Asian communities are taught that when they're younger and they're doing it. And there's a lot more of them than there are of most of us. And on the Japanese side, they're taught to save up to 60% of their paycheck. What you're really saying is, I choose today to be selfish to get what I want over tomorrow. Now, the listeners who are like, oh crap, I want to learn. I can't physically do 50%, of course, right? Because I've already had lifestyle creep. I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to the person who's brand new, who doesn't even have their first singles apartment yet. That's who I'm talking to. You have the opportunity to not do that. And so when I left college, a big thing that I did is I think I can't remember, but I put an extremely high amount. I think the lowest I ever dipped was 20%. And I think I tried to really push for 40 or 50% of my savings. And I moved to a big city and did all the things, but I was a college kid before that. So I was used to not having the things. So from the first paycheck, I just saw, hey, 40% goes to this bucket. And the remainder is what I have to eat, buy groceries, have gas, and live out of. And you know what? I found a roommate, and we made it work, and it was awesome, right? So you have that opportunity. Now, if you are on the other side, hey, you got a family, you have kids, you have all this stuff. Again, the other thing Dane said is, hey, just put $20 away, automate $20, automate $10, $1, whatever it is, automate something, so you're in the habit of it.
Yeah,
So yeah.
exactly right. And there's two things I want to bring up. There is a precursor to this, and especially in his book, his actual first lesson, he says you first need to choose to be wealthy. Otherwise, all of this, or choose to be someone who is a saver, right? Choose to be financially independent, or choose to be a good manager of money and finances. It comes to a choice. And so he has even labeled that chapter, I choose to be wealthy. And then he says, put it on your mirror, put a little sticky note on your credit card, so that as you start to question your spending, your tracking, your habits, those automations of paying yourself first, it's because you made the choice. You first elected and declared, hey, I choose to be wealthy and I will do this as a result. Now, what's interesting, Hugh, you talked about young people. So my son, Ben, he doesn't get paid for any chores around the house. It's just contributing to the household and the lifestyle. And I need that lesson to be ingrained. Outside of that, though, instead of paying mowers and people to do a lot of the manual labor for our properties, Ben has become our person that goes and does these. He's our contractor. He's our vendor. And we pay him to do that. And I challenged Ben. I said, hey, you're going to make $100 from doing this, or $50 or whatever it is. And I want you to get in the habit of paying yourself first from the age of 14. And at first he was like, well, I'll have less money and I want all these things. I remember seeing kind of the gears start turning. And since he has adopted the pay yourself first mentality and he wants to be a wealthy young man, he has already put his $500 away towards his own investment account before the year has even started, before the season has started. So now he not only pays himself first, again, different episode, he's putting it somewhere that is going to benefit him 60 years from now or wherever that is. But we're forming the habit. And outside of, and like you said, that can be up to 50%. He puts a very large amount because he doesn't have rent and expenses. Thank you, mom and dad. But outside of that, the older generation like me who didn't live with this for a long time, I could only start with $20 in the beginning. So you can start anywhere, but I would automate it to Hugh's point. I was like, man, it's only 20 bucks, but all of a sudden it became 100, it became 200, whatever that was. And now I'm able to put an easy 10% away, right? From that just habit as you build up to that. But you got to start somewhere. And you might not be able to put 50% away, but you can put $1 away. You can put 20 bucks away. I can promise you that.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So the next question is, where do you put it, right? You're saying automate this. Where do you put it?
So and just made it super simple because I'm not a fancy, complicated guy and I'm not that smart. I just created a savings account in my bank. Well, it was already there, and I just relabeled it Pay Myself First. I needed to get into the habit of seeing money flow into that. So it now funnels into my Pay Myself First account. That's where mine goes. But I'd like to ask you the same question. Where is yours going before we get into what you can do with it?
So I'll tell you where mine's going right now. I'll tell you where mine went when I was just starting out, when I just learned this. So initially, it just went into a savings account. What I was finding is because I could see with my eyes the savings account when I pulled my phone up or checked on the computer screen, I'd say, oh, look, I have $1,500 saved up. You know what? I'll borrow from that and then I'll spend it. And then what was happening was never actually savings. So what I did was I had a second bank account, right? My bank account from my hometown versus, right, predominantly I used USAA, is I just automatically saved it to the other account. I could get to it just as easily, but I never checked that account because the only thing that it was used for was just that one thing, which was the automated draft. And so I never even saw it. I forgot about it, and I just naturally being the save over time. Then I was never tempted to use it, right? So that was where it goes now. Now, once I had a sufficient emergency fund, in my opinion, that's 3 to 6 months of emergency savings for runway. Then after that, now everything from my Pay Myself First goes to a brokerage account that goes to an S&P 500 index fund, which we'll get into. Don't worry about that. In the future, I'll tell you, basically, I'm going to look at it. People are going to fight me on this in the comments or whatever, but it's a fancy savings account that gives you 12%, 8 to 12%, 8% on the low end. Well, even if you're at 7% over the course of time, it's still way better than anything a high yield savings account can even give you. So,
Yeah.
it automatically for me goes to build the savings and emergency reserve. And then after that, everything now, because I stopped contributing to emergency funds, everything now goes to a investment account, or I like to say a fancy savings account. So I'm at least keeping up or outpacing inflation a little bit. And we're going to get into all of that later.
Well, and for you parents out there, my version of a fancy savings account for my son was opening a Roth IRA. And so his pay, which he's earning himself, that he's paying himself first, he then takes and gives it to a money manager and invests it in this account. So it's hard to get to, and it's something that's going to build long term for him. So again, if you're trying to build this habit with your kids, also make it hard for them to get to it. So I had to educate Ben a lot on what that is. He got to meet the CPA and the financial manager and have these conversations, ask these questions. He felt like it was so cool because he's a young guy who's like growing into manhood now. He's being smart and he already has these professionals around to advise him with good things, including his parents who want to, guide him in the habits. But the best way to do that was put his money somewhere where it's going to grow for him. Very fancy savings account. That Roth IRA is also invested into index funds. So again, things we'll cover later, but ways that not just for you, but teaching your kiddos the habit and where to put it and somewhere that they just can't reach in the cookie jar and take it when they want that sugar rush, because Ben will. So that's how we kind of safeguarded that.
Well, we're going to interrupt this video or podcast, and we're going to talk to you about our sister company or our sister podcast, which is the Small Biz Rescue Podcast. For those of you who are interested in the money side of things, some of you guys might be interested in business or starting a business. And if that is you, we have very similar to FU Money Podcast, the nuts and bolts, the very beginning, the fundamentals, where people go wrong, how to change, how to save failing businesses, and how to start off, better, right? So that
Yeah.
is
And
that.
well, I wanted to say what's really cool about that podcast is Hugh interviews people with legendary co-hosts, people who are running big businesses, people who've done exceptional things in the world, and then he takes that practical knowledge and interviews guests with these really profound co-hosts. So definitely check it out, Hugh. I think you're underselling it. You have something really special there, and they get into, like you said, how to run businesses, how to like apply strategies and things that we don't think about on these simple everyday levels. We just go to work, we collect a paycheck. I highly recommend, if you're a business owner, entrepreneur, check out that podcast.
All right.
You're welcome.
Making sure you feel successful and avoid burnout versus starvation. So, how do you do that, right? Because if you're like, okay, let's pay yourself first, you're contributing all this money to this other account. How do you balance that out?
That's a big question, Hugh. So I don't think this is something that I can answer as simple as the question sounds. And I have a different philosophy on that because I've experienced burnout. I've experienced financial burnout. I've experienced physical, mental burnout. So I would say, can you be a little bit more specific on what you're looking for with this particular question?
I can give you a example of where I was going to go with it eventually.
Let's hear it.
So this is a big one, and this really works pretty well. I can't remember where I got this from, but a lot of the financial podcasts and stuff will come up with this. But I have a fund money account, and so for the small plate theory, it's basically I have the things I care about, right? Food, gas, bills. You've got your savings, right? And so now here I am. I'm dumping most of my money towards that, and but you can't starve yourself. Like why go to the education and do all the right things if you're never gonna win, right? You got to give yourself wins along the way. And so to control that, then I had a fund money account. And so that fund money account was basically, I think I gave myself like $150 a paycheck. And I could save that, and I knew I could safely blow all of the money in that account every month to zero, and it had its dedicated credit card to on anything that I wanted. This also really works well if you are. We'll get into it later. We'll get relationships and money, but if you are married and you guys have joint checking and joint savings, and you guys can agree upon a price or an amount to have that, like, okay, hey, I'm going to spend this money on a nice date thing versus a us expense, or where you guys feel like you're getting that breathing room. And so I think it's super critical to think about burnout, right? Earlier, I was just saying, hey, if you're young, you should donate 50%, dedicate 50% to savings. But if you're always doing that for years and years and years and years, and you're just eating rice and beans, you're spinning your wheels, you don't feel successful because you're starving yourself. Don't do that. And that kind of ties into the next question, which is, how do you handle a raise while you're going along this scenario? Dane, what do you think?
Dang. Well, first I would say I had a fun money account. It was called my checking account. I used it all
Right.
the time. It was a terrible way to manage fun and spending money. And to your point, not everyone is single or can be so disciplined that they can live in a way that they can't add things in life that are important. I have a partner. That partner likes a certain lifestyle. So we had to find that fine balance. And I'm really glad you brought that up, because you can't live in the starvation model, but you can't live like we did, high income earners, and just like your checking account is your spending account. It's a really dangerous road to go down, and it leads you with ending up with nothing. You have to find that balance. Paying yourself first is honestly one of the best ways to do that. But oftentimes what people will come across is a pay raise. So Hugh, this is a perfect segue, because not only are we used to living a certain way, but all of a sudden if you add more money into the equation, what do people often do? They spend what's
Well,
additional. Go ahead.
exactly.
Yeah.
No, no, you
So
nailed it. Everyone generally was in that. Uh, like you nailed it when you said my checking account was my fun money account, and you just blew it all every month. What I did, or the way you handle burnout, is you dedicate another checking account. Right now, I'm talking about multiple accounts here. I know, but I dedicated an account so for the sole purpose of blowing on whatever I wanted, right? If I was a 20 something, I'd go out drinking into the bars. I'd buy my video games with that one. I'd buy ammo or whatever. That I didn't care what happened to the money in that specific account. And if I wanted a big purchase, then I'd save up a month, month and a half, 2 months, and I'd buy it from that specific account.
yeah,
When you get a raise, a lot of people will treat whatever is an additional and they'll just blow more of it. So what I like to do is just add the percentage base. I did everything off of percentages. So no matter how much came in, the new amount, I was already used to not living without it. The new amount gets to stay in the bank account. I bumped all the additional amount towards savings and everything, maybe 80, 90% of the new money, but I made sure I gave myself an extra 20 to 50 bucks or whatever it is. So I got to spend more. I felt like I was winning along the way, but really I was massively saving that.
yeah, right. And in all honesty, I had a fun money account too, and then I got married, and then I have a son, and that fun money became their money. So I don't have much in that account as of late because it's you're repurposing the things that again you value. To Crystal's point, what we value, we spend our money and our attention on. And I realized I didn't need as much fun money for me because now I have two people I really enjoy spending time with or spending money on. So my priorities change. But I will say, in regards to the raise, every financial advisor on the planet will say, oh, when you get a raise, don't spend it. Keep living within your means. Keep living like you used to. That's great in theory. But let's talk about a doctor, okay? You're going to medical school for 12, 15 years sometimes, and you're living off of basically nothing and a lot of times a lot of high debt. And the last thing that they want to do is spend another 10 years living like that when all of a sudden they have some real FU money, right? They're being paid what they're worth. And oftentimes, and I've worked with a lot of lawyers and doctors in the past when I was a financial consultant years and years and years ago, and we would do money snapshots. And the people that were in the highest debt were that category of working professionals because all of a sudden they had the income to justify massive spending. Their checking account became their fun money. And they were like, I'm sick of living like crap. I want a nice car. I want a nice house. And they just go big all of a sudden out of the gate, right? And so, again, in theory, it is nice to think you get a pay raise or more money starts flooding in. Oh, I'm going to be so good about it and I'm not going to spend it. But the real temptation, myself included, I'm guilty. When money came in, I spent it. So Hugh, how he safeguarded himself was by creating automation in his system. And so Hugh, just touch on that a little bit more again, because you did start making more money. You did start doing much better financially. How did you safeguard
I
yourself?
want to just let every listener know that I am a D student. I am completely incompetent and I do not trust myself. Yet here I am, 2.5 millionaire, $6 million of real estate, whatever. And I still behave that way and treat myself that way that I know I am irresponsible. My fundamental underlying assumption of myself is I do not trust myself from me because I am not force something to happen because I'm going to protect me from me. That's a big theme you're going to hear me say, and I run into a lot of professionals, right, that do, big professionals that do the same thing. Just like Dane was just sharing, right? And I'm going to use Ben as an example. He's 14, you say, and he's got all this money, or he's brand new to money, right? Let's take a doctor. They're graduating residency at like 27, 28. Sorry, they're graduating med school at 27, 28 on average. They're graduating residency at like 30, 31. And then that's the very first time they have exposure to actual income. And they're suddenly thrust into like an extremely high amount of income. But guess what? They've never interacted with money for real. They've had money, they've got it from student loans, maybe mom and dad. They have the same, and piss a lot of people off, they have the same emotional understanding of money as Ben does right now as a 14-year-old. And now, not everybody, but a lot of them do. And that's why doctors, lawyers, these big old professionals that we think are, hot shots, they're almost all of them are paycheck to paycheck. To prevent that, I force automate that. I think the human factor is such a big proponent that I do not trust myself to not forget, even if I have the best intentions, to not have the mental capacity to say, I really want to go to that concert, or we got to go pay for our wedding, or whatever it is. No, I'm going to automate this so I don't even think about it. I don't see it. And I just keep operating off of here's our bills account. It's got X dollars in it. Here's the fund money account. I can blow it every month. I don't care. Those are the two things that I automate. Everything else automatically is taken from me and hidden from me. And that is, I'm using that language very harshly because I know that I need that. It is my belief that many people do need that. And it is the only reason why 8 years later, I was able to start the business that got me retired. It's because when I was 22, I had a professor grab me and pull me into a room and on a whiteboard said, "You need to do these things. I wish I would have known that at your age." And I said, "I'm going to listen to this professor. I don't know what I'm doing." Here I am now because of those great lessons that I was taught. And so I think the automation versus manual is so, so critical that it's the number one thing protecting you as humans is automation from making bad choices. Because look at your finances right now, whoever you are. Think about your bank account. Pull it up and look at it if you can, right? Don't do it if you're driving. Is there enough money in there right now that you really appreciate and you're like, "Oh, I'm doing great. I'm fine." Or most of you, or many of us, are going to say, "No, I really wish I had more." And that's honestly how I convinced Dane to come work for me. I said, "Dude, you've been making 200 grand a year. What's in your bank account right now?" He said, "Nothing, or near nothing." And so the thought was, how do we restructure that thinking? Do you own things that pay you? So yeah, I think the automation is so critical. I think it's fundamental.
Yeah, well, and I appreciate you answering that because you're someone who I think is a really good example of having put those automations in place. But you touch on a really important point. We have to protect ourselves from us. Most of the time, we're overweight because of us and our bad choices, right? Most of the time, we're in debt because of us or because we couldn't wait to have that thing. Most of the time, we spend the raise because of us. We have opportunities all around us. We also have a lack of systems. So you're automating a process to protect you from you. And if we were all to have a very honest conversation with ourselves, we could all probably do that in some way or another in some category. Like I said, whether it's health or finance or spirituality, whatever that is, you have to put in safeguards to protect you from you. I wish I would have done that a lot sooner because I was doing the manual system. And no matter what you do, tracking, budgeting, it's not going to matter if you don't have a system in place to then protect you from you. You're just going to look at how bad you're spending. You're just going to look at how bad your budget is and how you're never meeting it. So the whole idea isn't just to, learn about these tools or use them. It's to actually connect them with a system that protects you. So you of today is always taking care of you of tomorrow. And I love this happens all the time in my life where I'll go into the car and I'll find my glasses where they should be, or I'll check into my pay myself first account and there's money in there, or something will have gone right and I'll be like, wow, thanks past Dane for setting future Dane up for success because I just followed through on something that I had done or set up, and I'm always grateful for it later. So do that with your money, do that with your savings, and you're paying yourself first. Automate it, make it protect you from you.
Yeah, it's huge. I'm lazy. I don't want to think. So I'm just going to keep doing the bare minimum that I have to do. And if automation is taking place, I don't have to think about it. I know I'm protected, and it makes me a better person in what I can do, what I want to do, because I'm never stressed.
Yes, absolutely. So I want to just touch on some of the key topic and the three takeaways. Okay, we talked about pay yourself first. This is the topic that we really wanted to dive into to give some great, hard, concrete steps in which you can do that. What are your biggest three takeaways, Hugh, from today's lesson, quote unquote?
The first one is just automate it, right? You just used a great
Autumn.
example. just like when I'm at home, if there's something important and I know that I'm thinking about it right now, oh, hey, run to the bank or drop this envelope off. I'll go grab the thing, put it in my backpack, put the keys on the thing. So when I'm leaving, in order for me to drive away from the house, I have to get the keys. Oh, look, here's the thing. I need to remember to drop it up at the mailbox. I set up I forcibly put something to remind me. And the automation is even a step further than that. It just automatically happens. I think that's a huge one.
Right. Number two would be set it and forget it. So this is, again, the simplicity of making the system work for you and then not thinking about it and then making it so that it's difficult to get to. It takes steps to reverse the things that you're doing good for you would be the forgetting about it part. You're like, well, I just don't have access to money right now. I can't just go buy that thing. I have to pull it out of an investment account. I have to go and get the thing or do the thing, right? Call my broker, whatever it is, sell a property. It makes it difficult. So that's what we mean by set it and forget it.
Yeah, that's a great one. Just if it's in a second bank account that you rarely check, it's still there. You can go get the money anytime you actually need it. You just don't look at it, so you forget about it. And
Right.
the big one next, the last thing is scale with paychecks, right? Make sure you're giving, make sure you don't have burnout. Make sure you're rewarding yourself along the way, right? Dane, one thing I challenge you is, you said you have your family, you have your son, your wife, but you said you don't have your own fund money. And so what that usually becomes is I'm going to dip into the checking account for when I do want to do something fun. Instead, just, hey, I'll have 20 bucks. What if I had 20 bucks per month and I don't care what I did with it? I'll go buy coffee, I'll go buy ammo, whatever it is, whatever your values are. That's now the, I don't know, fun stuff. And then if you have joint finances too, that becomes more special. Hey, babe, I took you out on this date with our fund money account or my joint, instead of a joint date, this is something extra special. I got a gift with my money that I'm allocated, right?
Right.
Steps it differently.
Well, and I will say I have a fund money account. It is just now controlled and managed by my commander in chief.
Somebody else.
And so, which is Kim, my wife. And so in order to get any fund money, I have to ask. And that's a little bit about taking the human out of it, knowing that I often would just dip into the checking account or do things. I now have consulted with her how much we're going to put aside for each of us, and that way we're making that money available. But often as a joke, I'll like text Kim and be like, "Hey, can I spend this?" And she's like, "That's your money. You can do whatever you want." So we kind of have this thing where I'm even protecting myself a little bit on questioning my fund money, just because there's so much in life that money can be spent towards, and we want to prioritize the right things. And oftentimes she'll be like, "Yeah, you don't go out and do much. Go do that thing." And then I get the support from her too. So there is that added decision maker in my life that we run things by each other, and we set up those monthly. We do our weekly money dates, and that's on our family calendar. We should do an episode on a family calendar because it's amazing. But at the end of the day, I have aligned my fund money with my values also. So what I'm going to go out and spend, I have the support from Kim and my family in doing so, and they're happy to see that I'm doing good things for myself. Everyone should have something to do something good for themselves with. So really great.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And this will all become a lot more clear on how to use this tool when we get into talking about debt, which is going to be an upcoming episode. So the different buckets that you have, right? The conversation we've had recently has been very focused around, hey, you get paid, you have your bills, and that's it. Huzzah. Break it apart. But if you're listening right now and you're like, oh my gosh, I have debts, none of this applies. It's not necessarily true. This can actually rapidly help you pay your debt down. And we're going to get into how to use this. We just wanted to outline the concept at the very beginning. What is pay yourself first? Before you actually look at the money, pre-parse it out into the buckets that you say you care about. Then operate like you normally would. This is the money that I spend bills out of. This is the money I spend fund money out of, or whatever your values may be, whoever the listener is. Dane, anything else for the listeners before we head out?
The last thing I will add to that is I've joined many masterminds, spent lots of money to be told the same thing that you're just getting for free as a listener. And so a lot of times you'll pay 10 grand to be part of this or 5 grand to be part of that. And they will always start at the fundamentals of what we're just going to share with you, how to be responsible with your life, your money and align that with your values. So Hugh, I'm really grateful to be touching on these topics. These were always kind of in the background. You hear about them, but often I felt in the dark about some of the simple, principles of good money management and finance. So thank you, sir.
That's huge. All right, guys. Well, we will see you next week with our next topic. And until then, guys, go out there, eliminate the struggle, and fix what bugs you.
Hey, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in. As always, Hugh and I really, really try to deliver value in these episodes. So if you learned something, you thought something was funny, you enjoyed a guest, please hop on to wherever it's being hosted, whether that's Spotify or Apple, and drop us a 5-star review. If it's anything lower than that, email us separately. We may or may not respond, but at least all of the things that we did right, let us know. And truly, if we did anything wrong, or if there's guests that you want to see, we aim to please, and you just want to be a guest on the podcast, how can they get a hold of us?
If you want to be a guest or ask us any questions, you can email fumoney@hughcarnahan.com and let us know. Again, we read every comment that comes our way. We actually have 2 or 3 super exciting ideas for shows that have already come our way. Again, we appreciate everything, guys. Remember, real quick, we are not experts at anything. This is not financial advice. Make sure you do your own due diligence. We are for entertainment and educational purposes. Don't listen to random strangers on the internet. We hope to share our message to get as far as we can to normal, everyday folks, blue-collar folks, military folks. This is information that all of us should have. And so if you liked it, please share it. Guys, we will see you in the next episode. Woo! Woo!